What do you want to do?
Tell your story.
Tell my story? My story about what?
About your accident, about your second chance in life.
Second chance in life? Well, I knew it was going to happen because back in 1998, there was a time when I was doing a transition from living with an ex-girlfriend to getting out of that situation, moving back to my parents' house, and getting a new job, and doing well, selling mortgages, driving all up and down the eastern district of Missouri. And when I was doing that, I was seeing a lot of people, and one day came around and I burnt my hand really bad. It got burnt. I went to this doctor friend we had back in Louisiana. He was a very smart man, Egyptian doctor. And this doctor, he actually had a son that was 2 years younger than me, that he's a doctor now. But we went to college at University of Missouri, Columbia, and we went to spring break together, had some good times. But anyway, he went and fixed my hand with some silver solvent to help my hand heal. The next day, I called him up again and said, I need to have you look at myself and give me a shot to relieve this poisonous in my body. He said, from what? I said, I got stung by a bunch of yellow jackets. He said, oh goodness. He said, that can be bad. He goes, come out to the house. He goes, I'll give you a shot. So I drove out to his house, and he was preparing the shot to give me. He said, David, he goes, what's going to happen next? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, he says, yesterday you came with these burn. Today you're coming, you're stung by all these bees. He said, bad things happen in threes. I said, well, get ready. Tonight's the night. And not knowing tonight was the night, I just knew that I was driving around. I had some appointments the next morning up in Hannibal, Missouri, where I had an office. My mortgage office was at. And I had appointments all up and down Missouri and Columbia, Missouri and St. Louis. And so I was planning all that to do. But after that appointment, I got a phone call from a friend of mine's girlfriend. And she said, David, she says, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just working, going here and going there. And she says, well, I just wanted to invite you to this surprise party that we're throwing for Darren tonight. I said, really? He said, yeah, he doesn't know anything about it, but it'd be nice if you could come. I said, well, I'm pretty busy. I got to be at Hannibal first thing in the morning. I said, I doubt if I'll be able to make it. She goes, well, she goes, I understand. She goes, but just want you to know that this is actually a surprise engagement dinner that we haven't told anybody yet, but we're going to have this party with all of our friends and family there that can come. And when Darren knows what the party's for, Darren and I, we talked about our wedding, and he wants to name you as to be the best man. I said, well, Jody, I said, for that case, I said, I'll be there. I said, so, give me some time, but I'll be up there tonight before sun's down. So she told me where to go, where to meet up. And I went to that party, an engagement dinner, and surprised Darren, surprised everybody else, and made an announcement that I was gonna be the best man. And then they wanted to give me a toast for me being the best man. And I told everybody, I said, I wasn't drinking. I said, I'll do one shot for the party. So I did a shot and drank it, did a beer chaser with that. And then afterwards, just hanging out and relaxing for a while. And driving home, go back to my grandparents' house, which was actually 30 miles away from Moberly where they were at. I fell asleep driving. And I guess I fell asleep. I don't know. They said that the phone's records were, I was having bad phone reception. I was trying to make some phone calls and whatever else, and then that was it. But then you looked at the highway where it was at, you saw that I went off on the left-hand side of the road, then I corrected myself and shot off to the right side of the road went off a 7-foot embankment. The car rolled several times, about missed a concrete culvert by inches. That would have killed me on the spot. But the car ended up upside down. And at that time, I guess apparently I had the smart enough to put on my seatbelt that night, because I never wore a seatbelt, never ever wore my seatbelt. But I had my seatbelt on that night, and I disconnected my seatbelt, and they said that I turned the car off, put the car in park, turned the key to the off position, and I was trying to get out, but I couldn't get out because my leg was caught underneath the dash. And I guess that's when the brain swelled up and I fell unconscious. By the time the ambulance got there, they pronounced me dead upon arrival. They did not have a pulse they couldn't detect, and I wasn't breathing. And so they cut me out of the car with the jaws of life, because the car was so mangled up, they couldn't even get my body out of the car. So they did that and took me to the hospital in Hannibal, Missouri, which was about another 30 miles away. And I don't know if they drove fast or not, because they already pronounced me dead, but by the time I got to the hospital, I was blue in the face. Well, that means I wasn't dead yet, but I was lack of oxygen. So they said, get him into the hospital quick, and we have to contact the trauma hospital. They saw that I had a broken rib on the left side, which punctured a lung, and 3 broken ribs on the right side. That's from the seatbelt injury. So they knew I had my seatbelt on. And they stabilized me and put me in a helicopter, and off to St. Louis I went. And they told my parents, when my parents arrived to the hospital, they told my parents that, we'd have to drive me by ambulance back to Columbia, Missouri. That would have took an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes to get there. Mom said she just had a concert that she went to that night down in St. Louis, and she said it was clear skies, no rain yet. So that's when they went ahead and sent me to St. Louis Hospital. And this is actually where that doctor friend of mine works at. And so my parents called him up and said, Dr. Sopke, could you please meet David at the hospital? And they said, Mrs. Garrett, we just want you to know that David's burns, David's bee stings aren't that bad. He doesn't need to go to the emergency room. He said, no, he had a bad accident and it's pretty serious. So that's when he dropped what he's doing and said, he goes, I'll meet the helicopter there. So they arrived there, helicopter arrived there, and they told my parents that, we didn't think he would survive the helicopter ride, and we don't know if he'll see daylight. They said, if you're religious, we'd like to bring in a preacher, read him his rights. So they did that. And at that point, it was pretty null. I was on full life support, a respirator, because I was only breathing about 6 to 7 breaths per minute. They couldn't even detect the breathing. And my heart was beating at such faint, irregular rate that they couldn't even tell the heartbeat. So I was on full life support and laid in a coma for 10 days. And finally, when I woke after the 10th day, they told my parents that, we don't know what's going to happen because his brain waves are negative. My brain said heartbeat, lungs breathe. That's it. I didn't have any response after that. And I don't remember anything at all but the last couple of days in the hospital. But my dad said that he was in the room when I woke up. And Dad said that I looked at him, just told him I was sorry. And that was it. And laying there in the hospital, the faint memories I do have of that is just when I came to, saw all these people around me, I knew I was in the hospital, I didn't know what happened. I didn't have a scratch on my body, not one. And for some reason, I couldn't move anything on the right side of my body. I couldn't lift a hand, couldn't lift my leg, I couldn't do anything. So,
were you paralyzed?
I was paralyzed on the right hemisphere. From my brainstem was lacerated 360 degrees, about 80% through. The first person in medical history at that time to ever survive that severe brain damage. At the time, they actually, in my early recovery days, they flew in 3 of the top neurological doctors and come and visit me at that hospital and just try to explain how I survived, how I'm up walking and talking and doing as well as I was. And they were asking if I had brain surgery. They wanted to look at the scars of my brain surgery. I didn't have brain surgery. The doctor said that this is a miracle. They said, he's in God's hands. There's nothing we can do for his help. We've seen this injury, we've studied this injury, we've only seen and studied this injury on corpses. And from that day, I knew that something bad had to happen. I didn't quite understand what it was. I didn't remember anything at all. And, as things continued, I knew that if anybody can get up out of this wheelchair, it's going to be me. And finally, I got to where I could move my arms just a little bit. And I told myself to get up, and I looked myself in the mirror and told myself, get up out of this wheelchair. That day was a day when I started going to the psychological counselor, and he was preparing myself and my parents for being and providing for a dependent person. And, that's when things were settling down with me, that this is something bad, but I wasn't going to accept it. That's where I told myself, I got to get up. I got to get up out of this wheelchair and start my healing. And when I made myself stand up, put my hands on the counter in the bathroom, stood up, my legs pushed the wheelchair backwards, and it rolled out into the hall of the hospital. The nurses came in and said, oh my gosh, it's David, he's standing up. So they came in running in there and put me back down in the chair, and they said, bring him the doctor. The doctor said, don't bring him into me, take him straight to physical therapy. So that's when they started working on me. They put me on a stimulator machine to help stimulate all my muscle masses to working again. Because at that time, prior to the accident, I weighed about 220 pounds, probably 5 to 10% body fat. I was in lean shape, great shape.
How was your brain function?
After the accident happened, when I was laying in a coma, they weighed me on the scale again. I weighed 172. I lost over 50 pounds of solid muscle mass after 1 week of isolation. And so there was a lot of work to be done.
How's your brain function?
They put me on an educational assessment test. And the first test they gave me, I kind of remember that test. They were asking me questions. They were saying words to me. And I didn't know what these words meant. And when they were saying names of animals, I didn't know what these things were. And I scored between educational assessment between a 4 to 5 year old little boy is about where I was at. And after being in the hospital, before I left the hospital it was probably January the 10th.
When the accident happened?
The accident happened on August the 14th of 1998.
You spent 6 months in the hospital?
No. Roughly, I was in the hospital until, from the accident happened until probably the end of September. And after the end of September, I went to outpatient care. But outpatient care, my mother drove me back and forth to the hospital every day. I went to the hospital 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock that afternoon. As I was in there, and that's where they can work with brain injury people to try to, get their brain up and working as much as they could, because the brain was the last frontier in medical science. Like I said, they didn't know what my prognosis was going to be. They pretty much fooled me off. They said I wasn't even going to survive the coma. Then when I woke up, they said I wouldn't even be independent again. I wouldn't be able to take care of myself, balance the checkbook, drive again, anything. And I got up, left the hospital after the hospital told me not to do anything again. I came home and opened up the newspaper and started looking for a job. And on February the 14th of 1999, I started working as an assistant manager in Walgreens.
Were you able to walk?
Yeah, I was able to walk with a cane. and I had a cane that I used. And that time when I was telling you, when I woke up in the hospital and made myself stand up, push this thing back, they started going to physical therapy. At first, they put me on a walker with wheels. I had wheels on the walker, and I was able just to drag myself along. And throughout the day, if they weren't doctors doing tests on me, I was walking up and down the hall as much as I can just to get some strength back and activity back. And then finally, I was able to start picking up the walker. So I asked them to take the wheels off and let me use the walker like that so I can work on my hand coordination.
How long you were on the wheelchair?
I was on a wheelchair for quite a while, for a couple months. Like I said, probably got out of the wheelchair probably in October, and that's when I started using the walker. And then the walker, they moved me up to a cane with 4 prongs for stability purposes. I had that for a while. Then I got better with that. I was able to use just a regular, I call it a Pimp Daddy cane, just a small little cane, just to help me get around, make sure I'm stable. I still use a cane today when I'm going through airports and stuff. I think I might have to walk for a long ways because the pain that I have right now with the sciatica is stuff that won't go away.